Well, welcome everyone, and good morning, and good afternoon, good evening. It's good to see you all. We're just at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and start our slideshow here.
And you look an awful lot like Penny now.
This is one of the problems of Zoom. Once I came in as him, and it completes renaming me all the time. I will rename.
That's okay. We know who you are.
I know. I can't seem to get rid of it.
All right. Okay, so well, Benum Christ in it. I greet Christ in you and welcome you back. For the record, we have been having very frequent power outages, as I think I've mentioned. Also, we didn't have a power outage last night, but for some reason our Wi-Fi just stopped working for several hours. So if I disappear, my apologies. We're hoping for a stable connection this morning. So let us pray. It seems, O Lord, I have not one net, but many, all of which are now enmeshed and tangled, that I can hardly let go of one without the other. Good for catching neither fish nor people, but ensnaring me, entangling me. So take, O Lord, these nets from me, for without your grace, I will not relinquish them so easily. Amen. So our first reading today spans 164 to 65. For those of you who are reading in the book, there are a number of rather stylized passages in the Synoptic Gospels in which Jesus summons his first disciples who, at the time, are fishing with nets. On hearing the master's call, they immediately drop what they are doing and follow after him. As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in the boat mending the nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. That's from Mark chapter 1. The fishing nets left behind by the first disciples serve as a poignant metaphor for the contemplative whose vocation it is to see all and serve all as Christ. Whatsoever you do to the least of my sisters and brothers, you do to me, as we read in Matthew 25. The call to discipleship always requires us to leave behind all that ensnares us, the false self, attachments, illusions of separation from God. If we are to be fishers of people, it is incumbent on each of us to examine how far our nets extend. Jesus demanded that his Judean contemporaries see God at work in Samaritans and Gentiles, in tax collectors, prostitutes, and adulterers. These were counted among the most morally repugnant people in Jesus' day, the antithesis of a righteous Israelite who had given their lives to God. And this begs the question, in whom do you see God today? In whom do you see Christ? Or, more importantly, in whom do you not see God? Perhaps we can hold that question in mind as we pray. Amen. Okay. So our second reading comes from page 165. Are you able to see with Martha that the dear guest you serve is Christ? How far and wide do you cast the net of we? Does your net extend to your family, your tribe, your people, your nation, your species? Who lies outside of the boundaries of your net? Where do you draw the line between me and you, us and them, we and they? Consider this question and reflect long on its implications, because wherever we mark the boundaries of our nets, we mark the boundaries of our compassion. And let us pray. O Lord, let me know the freedom of loving as you do, beyond the petty limitations I put on love, to the vast expanse of your ocean of mercy. Amen. All right, so as always, you have the floor. I'm happy to take some time in silence as things rise up for you. Good morning, David.
Good morning. Part of me comes to these gatherings saying, I don't talk today, David, but then something just comes on in the reading that goes to such a deep place that I need to respond. And two things to share. Number one, I think that the future of the dying church in America is dependent on how these questions are answered. That's the hope of the church. And we're living in a time when we're burning books and banning books in libraries, a lot of good Christian people. My son, one of our children, sings in the choir and worships at St. Michael's Church at 99th and Amsterdam in Manhattan. Several months ago in that worship service, they had a liturgy with family and friends laid together and the laying on of hands for the renaming of James to Jane. It was a very moving thing in the context of that worship service for the congregation to surround and welcome. And then I noticed last Sunday that Jane was at the lectern reading scripture. And I thought that was just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And it told me how that church was answering those questions. Mm-hmm. That's all I need to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for that, David. That's just it. One of the things I think it's in the next, probably by the next time we meet or shortly thereafter, as I'm expanding these thoughts, is really just try to look at this question of how the seed of the gospel planted in first century Palestine has required the gospel to press past and beyond the social, cultural, religious, ethnic limitations in which it was planted. So it sort of has to break through the very culture in which it's being communicated on some level. And that so-called effective history of the gospel, which leads us to an ever widening sense of inclusivity, I think is part of the power of the gospel and why the work of really discerning the meaning of these texts is so important, to be able to distinguish between what one of my professors called the dream of God, which he calls the kingdom, and then how that ultimately transforms the very societies and cultures in which it's planted and leads beyond the very limitations of the culture in which it first emerged. There's something beautiful about, as we move beyond. So one example would be, how Paul would say, well, at least in one of his letters, women are to be silent in church. And how do you move from that to the ordination of women to the episcopacy? There's a way in which clearly there's growth beyond whatever the limitations of that text were. And we should also point out that with even the time of Paul, he founded churches that he left in the hands of women leaders. So how do we not take what he writes in a letter as doctrine, but as a pastoral response to an individual situation that gets sometimes elevated to a universal dogmatic teaching, which suddenly becomes for centuries the exclusion of women from leadership in the church and so on. So, but the gospel keeps calling us back, I think, to those questions of how do we remain faithful to what the gospel itself says, even when that has to break beyond the cultural, authorial, social, religious limitations in which it first came to be. I think that's a constant question we'll be exploring throughout the history of the church. And your, modern example would have been unthinkable even, 20 years ago, probably less. And so here we are. So thanks for that. All right. How are you doing? Good morning. Good early morning to you.
Very morning. Thank you, Father Vincent. I'd like to go back to the first paragraph you read this morning, and the last question from that paragraph is the one that kept repeating in my mind as I was reflecting during this period of prayer. I've got this highlighted in my book because these are questions that I think I need to come back from time to time to center myself in relation to others. And frankly, I don't have a question for an answer for the question that came to my mind in the sense that when you say, "In whom do you not see God?" Looking at the other or the other person with whom I encounter on a day-to-day basis, if I reflect on that person being part of the ground of being, then it's not difficult for me to see that, yes, that person has also Christ within. But then a question comes that if this person is having such a behavior or action that is impacting on others, especially those under their care or authority, how do I respond to that? Do I continue to see them as Christ and retreat meekly? Do I take the position of, or do I react in such a vehement way, such as Jesus did in the temple with the merchants? Frankly, right now, I don't have an answer. The only thing that occurs to me would be each situation is unique on its own. That's the only thing that can come to my mind. So yeah, I'll leave this open for comment. Thank you.
So Dwight, thank you, Dwight. Just to be clear, then, is the question essentially, how do I see Christ in those who are openly or overtly sort of acting in what you would see as in direct opposition to Christ or to love or to being compassionate? And how do I continue to see Christ in them? And then what should my response be to that? You're muted. Sorry, Dwight.
Sorry. Yes, that's what I try to convey. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I suspect my response will be rather unsatisfactory, but I've not come up with a better one. I do think that um, the ideal of seeing Christ in another is on some level, what's the word I'm looking for? A perspective or a framework that is essential for whether that's someone with whom I am sort of simpatico or someone with who I don't understand, or who feels somehow whose very presence seems or being seems to be in direct opposition or confrontation with anything we might recognize as Christ-like. I think what I've come to is, while in the world there has to be contexts in which people are held accountable, for example, or in which conflicts have to be waged because of the threat that an individual or a group, hell-bent on some destructive ideology is carrying out, that there has to be some way of dealing with the kinds of injustices that are being perpetrated, obviously. I do think there is a radical difference between protecting people, managing bad, criminal, unethical behavior, even to the point of a prison system, and so forth. But I think how we go about those things could shift dramatically if and when we don't let go of the idea that this person, while responsible clearly for their actions, is still that image, that body. So just to maybe give it put meat on the bones, if in the United States, and I can't speak for Australia, but maybe there's some parallels, if in the United States we really looked to our prison system as housing people who are embodiments of Christ and not just criminals we can hate and despise, right? What might that do to bring about reforms in our prison system, which are not merely punitive, but somehow trying to bring about the betterment of the people there through education, through therapy, through what would that look like? And I suspect that there's something naive about that because of the sense in which some prisons have really hardened so-called criminals that are just violent or psychopathic or just too dangerous to release into society, and because of psychopathology, incapable of recognizing their wrongdoings. So there's this very thorny element. But I also think that for people I know who are doing, for example, contemplative ministry within prisons, looking at questions of toxic shame, how many criminals in our system have been victims of tremendous abuse throughout childhood and how that has malformed them. What if we attended to those wounds as we are holding them accountable for their actions? Might a theology in which refuses to let go of seeing Christ in that person require serious thought and reform around the way in which our prison system functions and works? That's just one example. And I don't suspect there's an easy answer to that, but certainly it would have to be better than what our system looks like today, which is brutal on almost every level.
Yeah.
So, when I feel persecuted by someone or have built up resentments towards someone, the question where I find compassion for them is often, rather than ranting on about my upset about their victimization of me in some capacity, the place I find compassion is the place of not allowing myself to let go of the conviction that they are Christ on some level, right? And whether they're expressing that or not. And then from there to build the cultivation of compassion or kindness, because then the question is, well, what has gone so terribly wrong in their life that they have zero capacity to seem to express that or live into that? And can I then find that mercy?
Mm.
Constant struggle. It's a constant struggle.
It is indeed. Yes. Yes. Correct.
So when we look at the example you raised of, say, the turning over of the temples, of the table in the temples, I don't think Jesus had like a momentary fit where he lost control of himself.
No.
My sense is that he is really, this was a pre-planned, premeditated prophetic action in which he attended. You know, he wanted to shut down the temple money exchange system, at least for a couple of hours, to call it was a public display of protest against an unjust system, rather than him saying, you know, I don't recognize the divine in you, and that gives me the capacity to do this. I think he was absolutely, it's like it's one of those disruptive actions that tries to make a change in a system by calling out, right, its basic fundamental flaws. And so I would agree that there are times that's probably necessary. There's times we should be chaining ourselves to the front doors of, you know, oil companies and disturbing business for a few hours and calling attention to the abuses of oil companies or banks or whatever the case may be. That these kinds of prophetic actions do have a place, because what you're fighting there is what Paul says, you know, the principalities and powers, not the flesh, you know, the principalities and powers of this present darkness. And so how do we rail against that without turning against an individual? It's a sticky line.
Yes. Thank you.
I hope that gives you a little way to frame that, right?
Well, it gives me more food for thought.
Thank you. Good. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Carol, please.
Well, I'm in the same boat as Dwight. And, you know, I think we're divided up into groups of who wants God to be merciful and who wants God to be just. I'm on the just side. So I know Christine is going to be on the mercy side. So, I mean, and the thing that I come down to is that I do the same thing where I try to look like, you know, Alex Murdoch, you know, the big thing that this week in our nation. You know, I think everybody was relieved that he was found guilty. But then you look at him and you say, for people like that, you say, where is the seed of Christ so that I can love him? And then I think back at, while we were yet sinners, God sent his only son.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when there was no seed to be found in us, you know, God still loved us. And so I'm not there, but I know that's the goal, is that I can't wait to see the seed of divinity in a person before I love them. And so since it was Black History Month, I read the book by John Meacham on John Lewis. And, you know, I grew up during the civil rights era. You did too. But I mean, I grew up in DC and there was terrible riots. And, you know, in reading that book, it brought back the unbelievable hatred of white people. And it's just unbelievable. You're just reading this thing going, what is wrong with you? Why would you think this group was less than you? Or why did you think it was acceptable to release German shepherds on people walking across a bridge? You know, I mean, why all of these things? You were just like, what is wrong with you? And then these are the same people that would go to church, you know, and think that God was on their side. So, and yet the thing that touched me the most in the book, besides John Lewis, by the way, the first time he went out on a march or a walk, he took one of the books of Thomas Merton with him. So that's with his nonviolence or whatever, which I love Thomas Merton too. I know we all do. But bottom line was that there was a white supremacist in the book that at the end, before John Lewis died, went to him and asked for forgiveness. He had changed and he had, you know, and so there is hope. You know, that some people that are so hateful can change. And, you know, but as a nurse, I also wonder about sociopathy and people that are born that way. But then I think, what a miserable way to live, you know. But I think back on, I wish Catherine Mitchell was here, because I think back on when the Jews had the demons in the Bible. You know, now that we've evolved, I think we still have demonic stuff, but it's called sociopathy. It's people who have no empathy, who are born, but they're born that way. A lot of people that are born on that spectrum of no empathy. And and a lot of these people commit crimes. Now, a lot of these people don't commit crimes too. And there's people with empathy that still, like Alex Murtaugh, I think he had the demon possession of addiction. and narcissism and being born into a powerful family that never told him no, So, I mean, I don't know where I'm going with this. It just, I'll let you talk because you have a lot more wisdom than I do. I just, I'm in the same boat.
So I think just to come back to your original statement, do we prefer a God of love or justice? I think it's a little bit even more nuanced than that. What we all want is a God of love for ourselves and a God of justice for everybody else. I mean, and that's part of the dilemma there, right? And if you go back onto our St. Columba's website, for those of you in the Portraits of Christ class, I've given you access through that. But if you go back a couple of months ago, you'll see a sermon I gave called the Parabolic Booby Trap, which addresses this very issue of how we desire, in a sense, mercy for ourselves and justice for everybody else. This is the common human dilemma. And Jesus is basically saying, well, you should root the growth of your compassion for others based on what you would want for yourself. It's the golden rule, as we call it now. And you're right to say that, indeed, I don't think anyone is born a racist. These are ideologies, these are teachings we absorb from society, spoken or unspoken, various structures that we're born into one way or another that create and cultivate segregation, separation, misunderstanding, right, and so forth. And just like this man who, sort of repented to John Lewis, there is that beauty of conversion. There is that possibility, but you have to often overcome just tremendous obstacles that are part of your life from your formative years, right? And that's what makes it so insidious. Why it grows the way it does is because, that repentance requires a tremendous amount of unlearning. And that's the problem. So how do we? I was actually very heartened to be mentoring about 7 CDSP seminarians who came to the retreat house a week or so back. Two of the 7 were trans. A few of them were women, and all of them incredibly orthodox in their thinking and teaching. And I thought, well, this is an interesting and an unexpected sort of connection that I'm seeing here. And it gave me hope that in the future, these two things will actually marry one another. But you have to first stop demonizing people. You have to stop excluding. And then, because most people would say, well, how could a trans person be so profoundly orthodox or even quote unquote conservative, conserving what is good and true in the tradition? Why would they have an interest in that? They have an interest in that because they see the beauty in it. And they don't want to be excluded from that, right? So once you kind of put aside all the demonizing and all the separating, all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's just a person there. That's just a person. So how do we sort of expand? So whatever is that limit that is being imposed on each of us now, where we say, I can't go there, or I don't understand that, or I can't embrace that, or that feel. Just sit in non-judgment, see a human being, and love, and from that, beautiful things can begin to emerge.
Yeah, you have to. My church has done a lot about racism and trying to go back to your childhood and to do the work. And I mean, a lot of people resist change because it's working for them. Well, if you're white, you're straight, and you live in America, the world works well for you. I mean,
that's right.
So you have to John Meacham always says that too, that, being Episcopal white male, life has been good to me. It wasn't so good for John Lewis. So, right. And so he wanted to step in John Lewis's shoes. So.
Right. Beautiful. That's right. That's right. Thank you, Carol. Carl, please.
Yes. So about 10 miles away from you, over in the San Geronimo Valley, is an astounding modern saint. His name is Jacques Bourdon. He's, for the last 25 years, he's operated a program in the California prisons called GRIP, Growing Rage into, I've forgotten the into power. And it actually works. It takes hardened criminals, some of them on death row, and with love with tough love, with meditation, with encounter, with restorative justice in small groups. They have transformed so many lives. It's astounding. One of my dear friends works in that program, Bob Lick, and a couple of weeks ago, he sent me a letter from a woman whose brother had been murdered by gangs in Oakland. She now lives in Los Angeles, and Rip brought her up to San Quentin and had her meet for a couple of days with inmates on death row who had murdered people. And the result was overwhelming. She wrote an incredibly articulate email about the whole process. She's a very gifted writer, and which laid bare not only her own transformation in that process, but the awe-inspiring sense of divinity at work in that process. And so I think it's important to acknowledge when we see things like that happen, that we really see Christ's presence in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Carl. Yep, well done. Those are the kinds of system structures, methods that essentially take the concepts we're talking about and make them reality by actually finding a way into what it means to find forgiveness and so forth. So thank you. Christine, please. Christine, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So I just wanted to make a comment that addresses the concept of social injustice, systemic injustice, and what part we can play. And some of you may be familiar with the Hawaiian practice of ho'oponopono, which is a 4-part prayer that a person prays when they see when they can't see Christ, or they see some form of injustice being imposed by an individual or group. And it's a simple 4-step prayer in which you say, forgive me if there's anything I've ever said or done or thought that in any way has contributed to your condition. I'm sorry, please forgive me. Thank you. And I love you. And repeating this really helps me calm down and realize that how enmeshed we all are. We can be complicit in evil just by being part of this society.
Right.
I just offer that as something that I found helpful to do.
Thank you, Christine. That's actually very beautiful. So the 4 steps would be, I'm sorry, forgive me, thank you, I love you. It's essentially the 4 parts. Thank you. It's lovely. Peter, good morning.
Good morning. So what came to me in the discussion with kind of between Dwight and Carol earlier was that I love the way you challenged me to the whole thing about kind of seeing Christ in the people that are just un-Christ-like, the other, with the otherizing. And what I realize is for me, it's not so much the understanding or explaining the why Hitler is the way he was, or Trump is the way he is, or whatever. It's the challenge that brings for me the conundrum of seeing Christ, that opens up a space. That's the transgression, loving even that, or finding love even in that. and that leaves space for Christ to come through, the compassion, and through that compassion, it transcends all that evil stuff, even all that evil stuff in me. It's not fully formulated, but it's an interesting. I like the way it's just sort of it opens up a space. I guess it's like the tear in the veil that just opens up a space. It isn't about understanding or explaining. It's just opening up to it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Peter. At the risk, I don't want to turn this political because I don't want to make assumptions about who's on our venue, but I did personally struggle with a lot of Trump's policies and personality and the disruption that I felt he was causing. One of my congregants said to me in the midst of all that, the problem with Trump is he doesn't understand how gorgeous he is. And I thought that was such a beautiful insight that when I'm not acting out of my own, if you want to say, Christ nature, it's because we fail to understand we are beautiful children of one God, so to speak. So to place it in a context in which any individual is acting in a particular way that is harmful, destructive, chaotic, whatever, because they don't know how beautiful, or in her words, how gorgeous they are, does give us that space you're talking about. At least it gave me that space to have pity instead of anger, right? To feel compassion versus just disgust at times, or the kind of fury that I could feel around sort of some of the things I sensed were happening. So that I think can be, across the board, both on an individual, social, communal, local level, but on any level. The question is, do we realize how gorgeous we are? Do we realize how beautiful we are? And what would it mean for each of us to really embrace that in the fullest sense? What would then open up? Not understanding, but gratitude and joy, right?
Well, not only that is it's a way of letting go of our hatred and our fear that really weighs us down.
That's right. And it gives us something else, just like the way our prayer word or phrase has this, is sort of like the antidote to random thoughts, wandering thoughts, judgmental thoughts. Your mind is having just this playground of ideas. The prayer word gives us something else to grab onto, something to ground, center, and focus us, to discontinue or break a thought process. So the cultivation of this person doesn't know how gorgeous they are. Isn't that terrible? Isn't that tragic? Can I help to cultivate? So those thoughts interrupt the interior thoughts of judgment or anger or whatever, right? So all of these, we often think about, contemplation as that thing I do for 20 minutes twice a day, or whatever my pattern is of silence. But there are so many contemplative tools that I can cultivate to have in my toolbox throughout the day that can be employed in different contexts and circumstances, precisely to help me to remain more grounded, Christ-centered in a given moment that is beyond just those say that morning, evening sit that we might try to commit to. And cultivating loving kindness is certainly one of those, for sure. and for me, a tool I need to draw on often. So I think that's really an important piece there, to keep in mind. So thank you, Peter. Carmen and or Roman, hi.
Hi, it's questions for me. And I was thinking about, where is my love withheld, if that's the question. And it's not so much let's say the murderer in prison after he's been caught, tried, and put away. Then it's easier for me to bring the love and think of the backstory and hope for rehabilitation. It's the murderer in vivo, as he's breaking into my home and walking up the steps with the loaded gun. And I'm just wondering if there is any room between the dualism of, do I love this person and do I hate him? Would it be enough as he's walking up? Wouldn't it be a victory just not to hate him at that moment? Do I need to actually love him? And I'm extrapolating this to say the invading Russian army. I'm even finding it. I can love the poor conscripts. I can love the prisoners, the convicts that just wanted to get out and make a deal. I'm having trouble with the Wagner mercenaries that are there willingly and guns for hire. And how do I react to them in vivo, not after they've been caught and put in prisoner of war camps, but as they have their foot on the neck?
Yeah, Roman, it's an excellent question. I'm going to be honest. I don't know that in that moment you can. And one of I think it's part of our of the human dilemma. So, these are invading armies, particularly as you point out, the mercenaries this is just money for them. This is not even necessarily loyalty to a cause other than themselves, really. And the brutality and really the evil behind that is hard to wrap your head around. My sense is that the beauty of talking about the eschaton, or talking about the big picture that goes beyond even what we think of as history, is the only purview in which I can find a way to even make sense of that. So for example, I know that a lot of people have, in some ways, rightfully allergic reactions to Saint Anselm's satisfaction theory on the cross, about appeasing God's wrath and so forth. But I think, for example, theologically, the question you're raising speaks to that. Say what you want about his theory and all of its limitations, and it has some. His attempt was to ask, essentially, theoretically, the very question you're looking at, which is, if we're going to proclaim that God is love, God must also be just. You cannot be unjust and loving. You can't. So what we call, so tell the 11 million people who were killed by the Nazis, tell the Ukrainians who are being mowed down by mercenary soldiers, can't we all just get along? God loves all of us equally. Let it all go, and let's just hug it out. If God is to be just, he can't abandon the Ukrainian people, the oppression, the murder, the suffering, the torture, the trauma, and say, let's all just love each other, because it wouldn't be just to do that. And what Anselm is struggling with is, how does the cross address the injustice and the evil that sin, the wages of sin in the world? Not just, I stole a Snicker bar from the 7-Eleven, but people are being lay people, right? Civilians rather, are being mowed down by an invading army, who are perfectly innocent of any kind of military, political, right? So how does God love them? There has to be what I think is what we call the wrath of God is what the love of God looks like when you're opposing it, right? So there must be, if God is to be loving, some way of addressing the injustice, the pain, the hurt, the trauma, the death. And because God, by God's nature, must be nonviolent, is nonviolent because God is love, the only way to address that suffering is to take it on himself. Because you can't, God is almost, by God's very essence or nature as love, cannot impose it then on someone else. So then somebody has to pay the price. Something has to right that scale. Some level of justice must be paid so that those who are oppressed and tortured and murdered, so that price is paid, that's attended to. And I think that's what Anselm was struggling with. And I think it responds to your question. When that murderer is coming up the stairs with a gun, do you have a right to defend yourself? I think absolutely you do. I think you do. And I think there are times when, as in my youth, I was so attempting to be a radical pacifist. I realized at times it's unethical to do that. It's unethical for the world to stand by and let a tyrant murder, kill, maim, traumatize an entire country of people and do nothing for the sake of peace. How do we do that? How is that ethical? At some point, the ugly truth of history is you have to fight. You have to defend yourself. So how do you do that in a way that is born of justice, that is born of even an love rather than murderous revenge? There's a difference between self-defense and revenge. And I could forgive anyone for crossing that line in the heat of a moment where they're defending their family from an invading army. And everything has to then ultimately get worked out. But I think even if you're looking at, if somebody is standing in front of you and starts throwing punches at you, you have a right and a need to defend yourself. Once you've created a safe boundary between you and that person, then dialogues for peace and reconciliation can begin, but not in the middle of them throwing punches at you. You're not in a place where you could do that. And yes, you should be defending yourself in that case. So I don't know if we have to cultivate a feeling of warmth or love for that invading army or that person who is coming up your stairway with a gun at night. At that point, we have a right to protect our own life, to protect and defend our own family, to preserve what is good and true. And that might mean the use of force against an invader, personal or national. But so in the midst of that, one could forgive an individual for not cultivating love, for not cultivating forgiveness, for not cultivating a sense of mercy. It can only happen afterwards, and I think requires certainly reconciliation would require some repentance on behalf of the invading army, the mercenaries. That may never come, but you can certainly, after the fact, cultivate forgiveness so that the lack thereof doesn't poison you. Very difficult thing to do. We're not talking about a petty offense here. We're talking about brutal murder of innocent people.
So when it's happening, it's not a binary choice. I have to love them or hate them. I can find something in the middle or maybe suspend the whole question while I'm dealing with this emergency.
Yeah, and one could, to give you maybe a less, if you're riding your bike and you're meditating and you're repeating your prayer word over and over again, and then unsuspectingly you hit a pothole and the bike starts going out of control and you're flipping on your head and you're running and you're in the middle of this sort of bike accident, one could forgive you for not meditating, for forgetting to say your mantra in the midst of it, right? It's like, okay, but then you're down on the ground, you've got your skinned knees, your handlebars are twisted. Okay, take a breather, return to that space. But one could forgive you for forgetting to say the mantra in the midst of of trying to pull your bike under control and skidding on the ground. So it's the same thing, how do we, the more deeply we act out of this place of Christ consciousness, the more quickly we can remain centered and grounded. But there comes a point you have to fight. If you look, for example, at one of Christianity's greatest pacifists of the last century, which is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he was a great pacifist until when? Until he put a bomb under the table of where Hitler was having a meeting. Who could blame him for that? It's unfortunate it didn't work. B, had he done it sooner, millions of lives could have been spared. So how do you in the real world, how do you measure that? How do you tell him that was an unethical choice? It's ugly, it's horrible, it's conflictual, it should raise all kinds of conflicting feelings within our conscience. But what's the alternative at times? And what do you do about that? I mean, if there could be a very surgical, clear, clean assassination of Putin right now from the CIA, I don't know that I would put up any qualms about that. If that would mean saving the lives of potentially hundreds of thousands more Ukrainians or disrupt this, what do you do? I don't know the answer, but I know that we have to be forgiving of ourselves when we are in the midst of these kind of ideological battles that become wars, that become personal attacks. The question is, how do we respond with the minimal amount of force to subdue the power and then to return to stasis so that the healing reconciliation can begin? It can't begin in the midst of the bike accident. You're too trying to save yourself, right? That's your job, save yourself. I hope that helps a little. And I know how deeply personal this is to the two of you, and I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Grateful. Thank you.
Penny, please.
Yes, I want to go back to this idea that basically, I think I read somewhere that we are all tribal. And we don't have to reach the conclusion that the only people who perpetrate such disastrous things are psychologically damaged and monsters in some way caused by their environment, but that we're all initially tribal. Our identification is primarily with our family and then more broadly. And so altruism towards people who are different than us is something that we all have to work on. I think when we, instead of seeing the world as, good guys and bad guys, if we realize that our initial association and our initial reactions are to our own people, and working through that so that we broaden our view takes a lot. And one example of this is that I learned from my grandson, who is 11, and some other kid is sort of creating problems for him in school and terrorizing him a bit. And so the school response to the parents when they complained was, well, this child is having all kinds of problems. He's got some, disorders, and we need to be understanding. And on the other hand, the reaction is, no, it's up to the school to provide some limits to his behavior and discipline him so that he doesn't terrorize other students. So when I talked to my grandson about him, he says, well, he's just a jerk. And so I'm thinking already he's thinking that some people are good people and other people are just jerks. But the point you were trying to make is we have to resist where there is injustice. And obviously this child is terrorizing other kids. He may have problems himself, but there are limits to one's behavior, especially in any social situation. So how to get my grandson, Franklin, to see this child, yes, he's not a jerk. He's like you are, but he's acting out something that he doesn't really have much control over. But still, our institutions need to protect those who are vulnerable, and he is vulnerable. So I just feel like if we recognize that in us is this primary sense of identification with our own kind, and starting with our families and our own culture, to become compassionate and altruistic is an enormous lift for all of us. So I go back to your thing is, how do I see God in other people? Very often it's very hard to see God in ourselves. And until we do that, I think it's very hard to identify God in others. And so recognizing our own image of God in us, and then stretching ourselves to be identified with others in a deep way is I think what the Christian journey is about. And it's a lifelong process. It's not easy.
No, that's right. And it is a lifelong process, because throughout life, you're going to constantly encounter opposition, people who are treating you unjustly. It never ends. It never ends. And so how we continue to cultivate this and be a little compassionate on ourselves when we're struggling, especially, the larger the offense, the more difficult to struggle. But the struggle itself is worth it, I think, to come, as you're saying, not to just divide up the world between good people and jerks, but to really begin to understand that sometimes I'm a jerk. And what is that about? What unmet need or wound or so forth that, Keating would often talk about, those afflictive emotions that trigger me, but in that sense of our common jerkiness, we can also find a common humanity and a common sense of a place of compassion for another human being, because we realize we're not necessarily above that to some degree. Right. So thank you, Penny. Let's see, Tita, we'll take your question last, and then we'll move to talking about some practice. Go right ahead.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, not so much a question, but a sort of a general collective kind of response. There is something to the cycle of tension and release, which Freud commented on, not only individually, but collectively and actually geographically or geologically, a sort of, a buildup of tension and a release of that tension. So that's part of what we're speaking of, and how that's accomplished and how that's mediated. And the other piece is to mention that occurred to me is the process of how we ask our questions often determine our answers. And I find that why is not always the most useful question to ask, to phrase your question in the framework of why. Sometimes that can be useful, but there are other ways to ask questions.
That's a very good point, Tita. And very often the types of questions we do ask can predetermine the answer on some level. So how do we broaden that beyond? How do we ask the questions to get at the kind of answers we need to know?
Mm-hmm. And scientifically as well.
Yeah,
so as well as personally. So in terms of science and structure and answers, the way you ask it, you're not outside of your ask.
Right, that's right. Well, interestingly, we sometimes do what we call Iona lectures here, something I founded, I started several years back, where I ask Ph.D.s essentially to give talks, to get out of the ivory tower and to talk about how their particular passion or interest or research projects are having a direct impact on society or culture, religion, the environment, and so on. And then to talk about that. And we had a number of them. We look at, physics, and we look at, the study of space and all the things we're learning about black holes and quarks and what have you. And I remember one woman commented that we used to think that science was really about predicting the future. If I put this brick in a tub of water 100 times, I can predict it will sink on the 101st time. So looking at questions of buoyancy and gravity and weight and all of this. But she said what we're coming to more and more is the science opening out to mystery. Not merely answering this, proving that, but really beginning to open to say the world may be such that we have no capacity to really comprehend how it is structured and organized, simply because it lies outside of our instruments to be able to do that. So what does it mean to sort of enter science as an invitation to mystery? And so that is a very different way, a very different scientific method than simply trying to predict the future, which opens out, you're asking very different questions. The same, I think, can be true and is true, and is probably in its best iteration has always been true of religion. How does it open to mystery rather than simply answer specific questions once and for all?
Thank you.
Thanks, Tita. Okay, so thank you all. Let me call up, if I can, then our practice for the coming week, as well as then a conversation perhaps about our coming practice for this week. So practice for this week. In your meditation, notice just, sorry, that's supposed to say one net. Notice just one net you still cling to and drop it. So that's sort of the metaphor of this. Is there a particular net I'm holding on to that's otherizing someone? And can I challenge myself to drop that net? And take, for example, Carmen and Roman's concept. You might want to start with a baby step there in your practice and not go all the way to what's happening in Ukraine. Give yourselves a little break there. So, but to ask, where is a net of somebody in my life that I continue to otherize on some level, and how do I cultivate the capacity to drop that? Right. So let me then offer for this week, the suggestion was that we write a brief poem reflecting on discipleship as an act of holy transgression. And we'll pause here. Did anybody take me up on that? And if so, would you like to share with us your work? Nora, go right ahead.
Oh, I was hoping we'd hear from Nora.
Nora, and you're muted, Nora.
Really
There you go.
brave.
Really brave, but wonderful. Looking forward to it.
Okay. Sometimes church is like the grocery store, packed with canned goods and cardboard. I pull the prayers, the sermons, the rites off the shelf, reuse the labels, and put them back. What works best is to listen. Just listen for the moment when Spirit comes and I feel the Christ love from the cross. I want to check out with a full heart, leave via the service entrance, go into the world of the poor, the homeless, the God creatures with no voice. With a full heart, I can take them with me, and together we can lift our voices to praise and love and even dance and sing, because together we are ongoing creation, and together we are finding our way home.
Awesome. That's absolutely beautiful. Nora, would you mind sharing that with Joanne? Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I think a lot of us would like to have a chance to reflect more on that. Would you be comfortable with that?
I will.
Okay, good.
Tremoring.
Yeah, no, it is really quite lovely. The way you transition really from the whole grocery store to the transformation itself of loving and going back out into the world is really beautifully done. Finding our way home. Yeah.
It was inspired by one of our new parishioners who came from a church in Detroit, where they had over the exit door service entrance. Always remembered that. It strikes me always.
That is absolutely beautiful. Yeah, it's and you know there's some history there. The Roman Catholic word for mass comes from ete missa. Missa est. The mass has ended. And that's where we get the word dismissal. Missa, mass, has a root to dismissal. So if you think about that exit sign, the whole liturgy is named for the moment of your departure, for the moment of being sent back out into the world. That's such a beautiful idea. Most people don't know where the word mass comes from. It's from dismissal. Ete missa est in Latin. So you're dismissed. And so something really beautiful about how you even weave that idea in. We're at the grocery store, but the idea is we're all searching to go back home, right? It's beautiful. Thank you for that. And I look forward to reading that again. Marianne, good morning.
Good morning. I don't have a response to this, but I wanted to tell you, I loved the question a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't get to come back to the practice of what would the world look like if we had a contemplative revolution?
Yeah.
And I've been asking that to myself. I started an in-person contemplative prayer group just in the last couple of weeks at my local parish, but I wondered if I could somehow connect to or hear some people's responses, or what your thoughts on that were, if anybody wanted to if we had a moment or two.
Sure. So the question, the practice we gave a couple weeks back looked at this question of what would a contemplative revolution look like. I'm happy to hear other responses. And Christine, I'll ask you to just keep your hand up for now, so we don't lose track of you there. I think my own perception would be a contemplative revolution of any kind would bring about a world that is both more thoughtful, more compassionate, and more generous. And what that would look like would vary widely, broadly, depending on what it, you know, what your place in life is, and what you're exploring in your own life, in your own spiritual life, but whom you encounter, who your community is. I think it would look a lot like what any of us might, if we call to mind an individual, a person, a group with whom I feel resentment, with whom I feel lack of compassion, with whom from whom I feel wounded. What would it look like if I changed or altered or responded in love and compassion to that group? That's what it would start to look like. And then imagine that growing tenfold, hundredfold, 1,000-fold in the world. It would look like, I think, reconciliation. It would look like loving kindness. And it might look a lot like truth telling. So I open that if anybody else would want to sort of share their own experience, or if you did take up that and want to share, give some food for thought for Marianne. As you're thinking, Christine had her hand up. I will move to Christine, but if any of you would like to respond to that, please raise your hand and we'll come back to that. Christine, please.
So I have a simple little haiku. It goes like this. Holy transgression tears the veil, goes beyond edges, even the guardrails.
Nice. Thank you. Dan, you got all the syllables correct there? And for the haiku? Wow, good for you. It's beautiful.
May we hear it once again? That was once for the head and once for the heart. Would that be all right?
Sure. Holy transgression tears the veil, goes beyond edges, even the guardrails.
The beauty of that, Christine, is that the guardrails, as I'm hearing it, really do represent safety as well as protection. And the idea of this holy transgressing, busting through the veil, which we'll be talking about over the next several weeks as we wrap up this chapter, is about going beyond that place of safety and protection, right? Busting through all those things that keep us in our lane, as it were. Yeah, thank you. Peter, please.
Two, I think in the tears the veil, we expose ourselves in vulnerability. That's part of it.
Absolutely. That's right. That's right. Thank you. Well, and when we look at Marianne's question that she posed, a lot of that contemplative revolution, I think, would look socially like the dropping of these nets that we keep holding on to. That would be one thing. The expansion of our consciousness, of our compassion beyond where the places we currently hold them. And I think we have to think very clearly about what guardrails, what boundaries, what limitations we need to break through to do that, what perceptions. And I think we need to think very hard and long about what that means for extending the net even beyond humanity. What does it mean to include all living things in the context of that net? And looking hard at our exploitation of the planet that sustains us, as it were. So I think a lot of that contemplative revolution would look like the dropping of nets, right? The boundarylessness, the breaking through guardrails, many of which are put in place not just by society, but by our own religious traditions, scarily enough.
And fear.
Peter, please. What's that?
And fear, and think the Jews with the guardrails didn't see Jesus. A lot of them, some of them did, obviously, but I mean, and so you wonder how our guardrails prevent us from seeing Christ transforming the world and transforming ourselves, because
right.
we want to understand the process and we don't.
Right.
So
thank you. Thanks, Carol. Let's see, Peter, please.
Yeah, I'd like to request that Christine put that haiku in the chat or in the email or something, because I tried to write it down, but I missed a word or two. But I wanted to just reflect on what we were talking about a week or so ago when we were talking about what would the world look like the contemplative. What was how was it worded? A contemplative revolution, was that
Right.
So what I had come up with that week was sort of like just, it seems like the contemplative movement or practice is happening outside of the churches and outside of the standard form of religion, and so that was sort of just the only thing I had to start with. And the conversation that we were having, I just want to bring into here, that I've been kind of that's been percolating for me, is a flock. You know, like we become untethered and part of the flock, and how we talked about how like the lead changes in the flock. You know, the big flock and the wing pattern, and the drafting behind the leader that changes. And another thought that has been coming in this week is shelter me in the shadow of your wings. And so that's part of the contemplative practice. Feels sort of solitary, but it's somehow we take flight in the flock and in the community, but always taking shelter in the shadow of his wing, being lifted.
Beautiful. You're citing one of my most favorite lines from the Psalms, you know, in the shadow of your wings, I take refuge. It's such a beautifully intimate image. And the fact that it evokes a kind of dark, protective darkness, right? To be in that wing is just such a beautiful paradox to me. So thank you, Peter.
The shadow, our shadow, which sort of,
right.
You know, it's somehow through our shadow.
Right.
That we take flight. So I like it.
Thank you, Peter. I want to respond to that. I want to actually, if you'll permit me, it's an extended quote I can even post for you from Thomas Merton. And Marianne, I think that he offers here what I think is a really beautiful response to this question about what would a contemplative revolution look like. Of course, he's writing as a Roman Catholic Trappist monk. One might hear in his reference to Catholicism a broader reference to Christianity in general. But if you'll permit me this rather extended quote, I'll post it for you so you can see it, but I really think he gets to the heart of it. It comes out of his book, New Seeds of Contemplation. And for those of you who have that, you might be able to, I think it's on page 142. I have the share here for those of you who have a few minutes it's really quite beautiful. This is what he says. The biggest paradox about the church is that she is at the same time essentially traditional and essentially revolutionary. But that is not as much of a paradox as it seems, because Christian tradition, unlike all others, is a living and perpetual revolution. Human traditions all tend towards stagnation and decay. They try to perpetuate things that cannot be perpetuated. They cling to objects and values which time destroys without mercy. They're bound up with a contingent and material order of things, customs, fashion, styles, and attitudes, which inevitably change and give way to something else. The presence of a strong element of human conservatism in the church should not obscure the fact that Christian tradition, supernatural in its source, is something absolutely opposed to human traditionalism. The living tradition of Catholicism is like the breath of a physical body. It renews life by repelling stagnation. It is a constant, quiet, there's misspell there, peaceful revolution against death. As the physical act of breathing keeps the spiritual soul united to a material body whose very matter tends always toward corruption and decay, so Catholic tradition keeps the church alive under the material and social and human elements which will be encrusted upon it for as long as it's in the world. The reason why Catholic tradition is a tradition is because there is only one living doctrine in Christianity. The whole truth of Christianity has been fully revealed. It has not yet been fully understood or fully lived. The life of the church is the truth of God himself, breathed out into the church by his Spirit, and there cannot be any other truth to supersede or replace it. The only thing that can replace such an intense life is a lesser life, a kind of death, the constant human tendency away from God and away from this living tradition can only be counteracted by a return to tradition, a renewal and a deepening of the one unchanging life that was infused into the church at the beginning. And yet, this tradition must always be a revolution, because by its very nature, it denies the values and standards to which human passion is so powerfully attached. To those who love money and pleasure and reputation and power, this tradition says, be poor, go down to the far end of society, take the last place among men, live with those who are despised, love other men and serve them instead of making them serve you. Do not fight them when they push you around, but pray for those who hurt you. Do not look for pleasure, but turn away from things that satisfy your senses and your mind, and look for God in hunger and thirst and darkness, through deserts of the spirit in which it seems to be madness to travel. Take upon yourself the burden of Christ's cross, that is, Christ's humility and poverty and obedience and renunciation, and you will find peace for your souls. This is the most complete revolution that has ever been preached. In fact, it is the only true revolution, because all the others demand the extermination of somebody else. But this one means the death of the person who, for all practical purposes, you have come to think of as your own self.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So there you have, this contemplative social commentator, the greatest of the last century, perhaps, speaking about the gospel, the church as inherently revolutionary, and because it requires the death of your own self rather than someone else. It's actually quite beautiful. Marianne, I hope that gives you a little insight into at least how Merton might respond to that. And perhaps for Carmen and Roman, hearkening back to your earlier comment, the best way you can love the invader is to pray for them in this moment, for their conversion of heart, conversion of mind. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It is. Thank you. Let's see. So last word goes to Carol today, and then we'll wrap up.
Oh, I don't want to be the last word. I was just going to say how much I love this group, because, as you know, I've been through a lot of groups, and obviously it's because of you, Father Vincent, but because I think all of us come, and we don't all agree on things. And I was just texting Joanne and Dwight. A couple of people said things that I didn't understand at all, or were so above me. I just was like, what? But that's challenging. And in past groups, I've been in groups where we all had to think alike. And if you didn't think alike, or you said something a little bit off, people judged you or kicked you out or forced you out or made you feel uncomfortable that you left on your own. And, and this group, it's a loving group that we all come from different backgrounds and we have different things to say. And I'm ready to hear some of the things some weeks, and some weeks I'm not ready to hear what other people say, but I don't discredit it, and I don't want to throw it out, because I think that may be the comment that may change my life when I'm ready to hear it, when it's ready to take seed. So I just think you just do a beautiful job of addressing everybody's comments on our big wide spectrum, or whatever you want to call it. And and eventually we're all on our own journey, which is beautiful. We all don't need to be on the exact same journey. If we were on the exact same journey, 99% of us would be on the wrong journey. We got to be on our own journey and respect and love each other on their journey. And, so anyway, that's what I want to say. And that's what I feel about your class too. I like, I agree with you. In order for you to accomplish what you need to accomplish, we need to hold the questions. But I would make the class. I think people would be very happy to hear you talk for 2 hours. You said you'd like to take breaks, but but then we could ask questions, because I get a lot from other people's questions that would never even enter my brain, but it's because they come from a different background, or something is on their mind that isn't on my mind, but maybe needs to be on my mind. You know what I mean? So that's all I just wanted to say, is that I love that this group is loving, and we appreciate each other, and we welcome each other's thoughts, and we don't argue about them. What's to argue? So anyway.
Well, and Carol, so I really thank you. That's a beautiful way to kind of sum up not only the session, but what I hope people feel that universally here. And one of the mechanisms, and this may be a response to what you're saying, what Marianne was saying, even what Carmen and Roman were talking about. Like when I grapple with, say particularly another Christian who has very different ideological positions than I do, and which we're reading from the same Bible, and I'm mystified how we arrive at such radically, seemingly contradictory interpretations. And I think, how is this even possible that we have this difference and we're reading the same sacred text? What I look for is not what they believe, but who they actually are in the world and how well they embody. There are so many Christians who have very different theological, scriptural conclusions than the ones I draw, but they're working in prisons and they're feeding the poor and they're forgiving their enemies and they're loving their neighbors. They're embodying it. And it's, one of the things in our Celtic rite that we do here after the proclamation of the gospel, instead of saying the gospel of the Lord, I say, words of the gospel be made flesh in us. Like, in other words, may we embody this text, because the Desert Mothers and Fathers said, until you've embodied it, you haven't interpreted it. You want to interpret it? What does it mean to love your enemy? Start loving them. Now you've interpreted the text. This is very, very important to the Desert Mothers. You can put all your commentaries away and all your fancy schmancy academic things you want to say about the text. You have to start loving. You have to start praying. So that becomes the basis for me when I say, okay, this person may have really different conclusions. And believe me, we get folks at our retreat house, say out of an evangelical tradition. And I know that we could argue to the cows come home, and in Inverness, they do come home, but we could argue to the cows come home about, about this or that issue. But I see them loving each other. I see them praying together. I see them trying to as best they can imbibe this gospel in their lives. And I say, well, there it is, enfleshed in front of me. We don't have to, not all of our perceptions have to begin and end with our head. Look to the body, look to the embodiment as a place of resonance when your heads won't allow a deeper union of thought. Look to the body for union of action. And I think there's something very beautiful about holding that then for that kind of diversity.
Iron sharpens iron, right. Because having been in all of those groups, I try to take, and I told you before about my friend meeting Mother Teresa, and he was all ready to talk to her about her doctrine about going through Mary to get to Jesus. And he just said, it hit him. What am I taught? Who am I to tell her how to readjust her doctrinal thinking when she is a living embodiment of Jesus in the world? Right. So.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's right. Nora, maybe we don't have the last word. Go to Carol. Real quick, did you?
It'll be quick. Father,
Sure.
I just wanted to know if you would share the Merton quote with Joanne so we could all have it. That I think I have New Seeds of Contemplation somewhere.
Somewhere, yes.
But that is so powerful.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes, I'd really like to be able to meditate on it. Thank you.
Okay. For those of you who do have the book, it's page 142 to 144. But I will, when I send my my own information, when I share the Contemplating Christ information with Joanne today, I will include that and ask her to send that out as well. So you'll all have that a little later today. Yeah, thanks. Sure. Beautiful. Worth reflecting on. And Marianne, I hope that his text gives you, are you on that list where you'll receive that, Marianne?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Oh, okay, good. That might help give you a way to frame that with your contemplative community a little bit. To answer that question. All righty. So I know that we have another group coming in momentarily as we're pushing against the next hour. So go into the world then this week and find that place of love and compassion, of prayer and forgiveness, even in the midst of the craziness and the pain and the hostility. Remember that you are beloved, and remember we are united in that body of Christ. And let that remembrance be a source of grace and of strength and of compassion, starting with yourself. And so I pray that you go in the peace of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I look forward to seeing you back here next week. All right. God bless you, and we'll see you soon.